Today we're going to look at how to create a basic ritual. Now, most people have a fear of writing rituals because they look at the elaborate works of the Golden Dawn or Crowley or anyone else and think it's completely out of their league. They also have a fear that something might go wrong or that, at best case, it won't work. I was thinking through this problem and how I overcame it, and it was mostly because I was in an order called the Servants of the Light. In the 1990s, the Servants of the Light didn't have a ritual training program of any note, and they did encourage people to work on their own and their own rituals. But the sort of rituals they worked on were extremely basic, and they were reasonably effective. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through the steps for creating one of those sorts of rituals so that you can simply and quickly create the sort of rituals that you need to build up your confidence. Practically all rituals are based on a symbol. The Golden Dawn's naught equals naught ritual, for example, is based on the symbol of the Tree of Life. This basic ritual is based on the circle cross, which has within its meanings some tremendously profound implications. It is the cycle of the seasons. It is the wheel of life and death. It is the balancing of the elements. In the East, it is traditionally associated with air. In the South, traditionally fire. In the West, water. And in the North, earth. But equally, the East can represent sunrise, the South can represent the sun at noon, the West the setting sun, and the North the sun at midnight. All these things have implications in the rituals that you will perform. They will also be incredibly familiar to anybody who has been involved in the Western mystery tradition for any great length of time. To perform a ritual based on this particular symbol, all you need is a table or altar in the middle, a further candlestick far in the east, and 4 elemental candles at each of the 4 quarters. These can be pure white or yellow, red, blue, and black. You will also need a dagger or a sword or a wand. Notice I have not put any of the traditional Golden Dawn elemental implements into this ritual because they're not needed, and in fact they would confuse things tremendously. The next thing to do is to add some secret sauce. Now, this really is magic, and it's not something that's known or talked about in most magical groups. What you do, essentially, is place an imaginary reality over the top of your ritual space. Now, this was part of the Golden Dawn system, which is dutifully ignored by most Golden Dawn groups. But if you look at the analysis of the rituals, you can see that the technique that was being used in the original Golden Dawn flows evenly right through to the modern magical groups. What this involves is clearly and carefully visualizing a temple space over the top of the one you're using. Now, this sounds unnecessary or daft, but with a basic knowledge of Kabbalah, you can see why this is important. Using a simplified version of Kabbalah, we can see that our temple is safely rested on the earth. Now, the earth level partakes of the lower levels of the astral, which is the range of imagination, and also the treasure house of images and all the other things that are associated with astral magic. Now, the astral level is linked to the spiritual level. So theoretically, a resonance in spirit causes a resonance in the astral and a direct resonance on earth. When we imagine, we actually draw down the astral level into our reality. This is why when we sit down and visualize something, we can see something superimposed over our reality. Sure, it's a form of daydreaming, but its actual Kabbalistic effect, imagination is having a direct interaction with the material universe. So, if we took a temple and visualized it over our space, we are effectively enabling a better communication between the astral and the spiritual realms than is previously possible. These inner temples can be any flavor you like. Some people like Egyptian temples with pyramids out the window. Others prefer Celtic groves with severed heads on stakes sacrificed on the quarters. Either way, it's unique to you and whatever particular tradition you happen to be using. One thing is, it's always a good idea to keep it, because an inner temple builds up power over years. For years, I used one temple, the temple of the two brothers, who were Horus and Anubis. Now, really, this was a standard Egyptian temple, but every time I did a working, which was most nights, I would sit there and visualize the same temple furniture, and the same god forms in their places. And after a while, this developed a unique power, which meant that every ritual started to increase in emotion and power based on those particular experiences. In fact, because I was using an astral temple, I could set up that same state in any other ritual environment. So if I went to a friend's place, the astral temple was portable, and therefore all the work I'd done at home could be used in another space. And face it, who wouldn't want to work magic in a Greek, Roman temple without the need or worry about security guards, tourists, or people think you're odd for vibrating Hebrew names in the Great Pyramid? The good thing about imagination is literally anything goes, and you are only limited by your ability to dream it. Traditionally, your inner temple would be part of a bigger inner landscape, which you have also visualized. And you would start your working by going into your ritual space and path working to your inner temple. The reason for this is it centers you down nicely and makes you ready to do the work. Once you have path worked to your inner temple, you would open your eyes and visualize as clearly as you can that inner temple on your immediate surroundings. This means that however small your flat is, it can still be a temple in ancient Egypt. The next thing we're going to do is something that the SOL didn't do, which is invoke the higher. Now, SOL got around the same problem by declaring that each of their rituals were done in accordance to the divine. So they would say their intention was, it is the intention of this ritual, if it is the will of the divine, for me to get that woman over there who's quite cute. That way, they had the same get-out clause. In the GD, we suggest that you invoke something that is bigger than you. And for most people, that will be the god who's in charge of the ritual. So if it's an earth working, you would use the Kabbalistic name Adonai Haaretz. But it can also be your contact, if you have one. Now, this is a personal thing that is unique to you, but if you have a particular god form or personality that works with you, you can perform a small invocation to them while lighting a candle as a sacrifice to them. Again, it has the same effect of moderating the ego, so that if the ritual is successful, you can't say, look, it's all me. You have to say, this guy got credit as well. Now, these invocations don't have to be very long, and they're often best taken from commercial sources or historical sources or prayers or poems. All these things work. Here's what sort of thing I have in mind. Hear me, Mercury, messenger of Jupiter, son of Maya, almighty in heart, lord of the deceased, judge of contests, gentle and clever. You are the guide of the flying sandals, a man-loving prophet to mortals, a vigorous god you delight in exercise and deceit, interpreter of all you are, and profiteer who frees us of all cares, who holds us in his hands, the blameless tool of peace. Bless and empower this ritual with thy authority. Now, having set the stage, it's time to begin the ritual properly. And like all rituals, you begin with the lesser invoking ritual of the pentagram. Go east and perform a Kabbalistic cross, and then draw your first invoking pentagram. Now go south and draw another one. Notice I'm not mentioning anything about elements here, because although SOL and Wicca considered these to be elemental gateways, they were sadly mistaken. Then west, and then finally the north. Complete the circle by walking to the east, pause, and then walk to the western side of the altar and face east. Visualize the angel Raphael, and then say, "Before me, Raphael." Imagine Gabriel being behind you, and say, "Behind me, Gavriel." Extend your right hand and point towards the south, and say, "To my right hand, Michael." Take your left hand and point to the north, and say, "To my left hand, Uriel." Now visualize all 4 angels at once, with the pentagrams in front of them. The pentagrams should appear as if they're on fire. And you say, "About me flame the pentagrams." You visualize yourself as a great golden cross, radiating energy to the entire circle. As you do so, you visualize a large golden hexagram forming over the altar. You then say, "Within the columns shines the 6-rayed star." Using the lesser ritual of the pentagram has created a magic circle. This is common in most forms of Goetic and Solomonic magic. What we are now going to do is place on that magic circle the God forms and elemental energy which we want to bring into our circle. What we are going to do now is go to each of the quarters and do short invocations. We don't want big, heavy theatrical jobs because we really don't want too much power flowing into the circle at that point. Instead, what we're after is almost like a background hum. But because we are using God forms and elemental powers, that background hum is quite powerful. We're going to start in the east with the divine powers. The reason we start with God forms is that we are trying to bring power down the levels. So we start with a God form and end with an elemental power. Each of the God forms comes from the same pantheon. So if you have a Greek ritual, you'd use a Greek pantheon. If you're using an Egyptian ritual, you use an Egyptian one. You do not mix them. This is not because of any particular fear or anything else. It just is messy and gives an unusual form of energy. What you then have to do is look to create very, very simple invocations at each of the quarters. These really are simple ones and can be pulled just from a couple of sentences taken from an old text or something, say, from the Book of the Dead if you're using Egyptian. As you can see, selecting the God forms is a bit of an art form in itself, and this takes a bit of practice to get it right. Usually, you are looking at 2 pairs of God forms. Here is one example using an Egyptian ritual, where you have Isis balanced with Osiris in the east and the west, and Anubis with Horus. This is because they are husband and wife and brothers. When I was using this particular system, we used to try and find God forms that were connected to the particular types of elements for each of the quarters. So, for example, whatever we put in the east had to be connected to air in some way, and something in the south had to be connected to fire. Generally, though, I never found it made any difference. The actual energy is provided by the polarities created by the two god forms. So here we've got Isis and Osiris forming the polarity, Anubis and Horus forming the polarity. That is more important than actual elemental force at that particular position of the ritual. So what sort of invocations are we looking at? Well, nothing too elaborate. I'm basically talking about going to the east and saying something like, "Hail to thee, Osiris Chienti Amenti, stand thy guard at the gate of the rising sun," or something like that. Going to the south and then saying, "Hail to thee, Horus, bull of thy father, stand thy guard on the portal of flame." Either way, we're not talking big invocations here. And you would then go to the west and say the same thing about something nice about Isis and something nice about Nephthys. Of course, you'd do it all very slowly, very, very dramatically, and you would visualize the god forms as clearly as you can within the framework of the ritual. So there's nothing really slapdash here, it's just short on the actual invocations. What you then do is you would then start to invoke the elemental kings. And these come from the Golden Dawn and via Levi rather than anything else. They do the job, so I've kept them. Air, you have Peralda. South, you have Jin. Gob in the north and Nixa in the west. Again, your invocations don't have to be very long. In fact, just a couple of sentences relating to the kings and their nature. What's more important is you are actually visualizing them as clearly as possible in their full elemental powers. When you have finished, you return to the center and stand at your altar. And it is then you create a full invocation. Now, this is a long ritual or a poem that you have dedicated to the god form you are calling, or spirit, or anything else. What we will use as an example is Helios, because we have already placed our Egyptian gods around us. Helios, or Ra Helios, is a synthesis of the other four gods, and therefore more likely to be channeled by them. What we then do is we construct a ritual poem. Now, again, there are plenty of rituals, long hymns to Ra that have been founded on pyramids and all sorts of other things. And we can use these. But it is best that if we try and craft something ourselves, because it's part of the sacrifice. It's part of us putting something into the working itself. So, don't worry if it's crap. It doesn't matter. If you say to yourself, well, I haven't been able to write poetry ever, and when I did, I was an angst teen, and it sounded awful, and I showed it to my friends, and they laughed. It doesn't matter. You're not showing it to your friends. You're not showing it to anyone. This is between you and the God you're calling. So what you do is you visualize the God that you're calling as clearly as you possibly can, formulating over the altar. This has created a thought form. And into this, your invocation is going to inpour power. Now, it's going to be your words. Now, people talk a lot about words being problematic, particularly within the Golden Dawn tradition. But what you're doing with your words is you're bringing down the energy and interacting within it. You're allowing your words to get yourself carried away into whatever that God form is and does. Now, some of these words can just simply be titles of the gods because they can be very evocative. So don't worry too much about it, but I would not be happy with an invocation that didn't go for at least 5 minutes. Now, it sounds long, particularly if you've ever written a poem, but it isn't that difficult really. And there's nothing wrong with repetition. In fact, some of the magical papyri insist on repeating the same phrases over and over again to get their magical effect. But the whole aim of it is to make this thought form as alive as you possibly can make it. Here's the sort of thing I have in mind. Rejoice with me, you who are set over the east wind and the world, for whom all the gods serve as bodyguards at your good hour and on your good day. You who are the good daemon of the world and the crown of the inhabited world, you who rise from the abyss, you who each day rise as a young man and set as an old man. I beg you, Lord, do not allow me to be overthrown, to be plotted against, to receive dangerous drugs, to go into exile, to fall upon hard times. Rather, I ask to obtain and receive from you life, health, reputation, wealth, influence, strength, success, charm, favor with all men and all women, victory over all men and all women. I call upon you who have all forms and many names, doubled-horned one, whose form no one knows except him who made the entire world. Yahweh, the one who shaped you into 28 shapes of the world so that they may complete every figure and distribute breath to every animal and plant that might flourish. You who grow from obscurity into light and leave light for darkness. And the first companion of your name is silence, the second a popping sound, the third a groaning, the fourth a hissing, a fifth a cry of joy, a sixth a moaning, a seventh barking, eighth bellowing, nine neighing, 10th a musical sound, 11th a sounding wind, the 12th a wind-creating sound, the 13th a coercive sound, and the 14th a coercive animation before perfection. Ox, vulture, bull, beetle, falcon, crab, dog, wolf, serpent, horse, she-goat, asp, goat, he-goat, baboon, cat, lion, leopard, field-mouse, deer, multiform, virgin, torch, lightning, garland, a herald's wand, a child, a key. I have said your signs and symbols of your name so that you may hear me, because I pray to you, O Master of the whole world. Hear me, you the stable one, the mighty one. Helios, 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 Helios. I should point out that I didn't write that. It was an Egyptian papyri, and it was translated into English, and I messed around with it a little bit to make it a bit more coherent. But that's the sort of thing you can play with, and if you really put yourself into it, which, face it, I'm talking into a microphone, it's not going to be the best job you can do, you can get thoroughly carried away with it and the visualization. And then, once it manifests, you can talk to it. You may not actually see it. In fact, it's pretty unlikely you will. But you'll have a strong feeling of energy around the altar. And you can use that to build in your imagination the thought form of Helios and converse with it. Now, what it says is going to be entirely subjective and everything else. But the goal of this ritual is not necessarily to get great things, great wealth, great health, protection, or anything else. It's really to interact with the force and start experimenting with it. Remember, this is a basic ritual. It's not a heavy-duty job. It's probably enough. Now, for example, if you were sick and you wanted Helios's help, after doing that big, long invocation, you could ask him for help. I would additionally add, since it's Helios, that you take a yellow candle, write your name, if it's you that's sick, on it with the name Helios on it, and offer that candle as a sacrifice to him. That way, you have got the interaction between you and the god. Once you've invoked Helios, you then proceed to give a short speech thanking him for showing up. Now, even if he didn't show up, or even if you didn't perceive that he showed up, it's not important. You're going through the motions of thanking him anyway, because if he does show up again in the future, then you've automatically got yourself programmed to thank him. You also thank the elemental kings and the gods for their presence in the ritual. This is just naturally polite, but it's also, again, assuming that these beings were actually there and involved. So, the next thing you have to do is close down. Now, SOL insisted that you go around anti-clockwise and do everything very slowly. Personally, I don't see the need for it. It's taken me years, but Normally, all you need to do is say, the eastern gate is closed in peace, the western gate is closed in peace, the northern gate is closed in peace, the southern gate is closed in peace, there is peace generally, or there is peace throughout the land, the ritual is complete. Anything that ends the ritual for you. Now, some people don't like this because they have the feeling that they haven't closed down properly and all sorts of other superstitions that are associated with it. Personally, I've not had that problem. But if you do have that problem, you could end your ritual as you began with a banishing ritual of the pentagram. And this effectively would close down, and you do it in reverse. So instead of starting in the east, you'd start in the north and go through to the east. This anti-clockwise action is a sort of unwinding of the power. Again, it's a basic ritual, and you don't need to do too much with it. Personally, I haven't seen anything that indicates that there is any point having an elaborate closing ritual, and it does take time. And after you've had your big experience, you really want to go back and write it up in your diary. So, that's the ritual done. All very simple, all very clear. All you have to do is write down the most basic of instructions for you to follow and the most basic of invocations. But what's most important is that you try it, that you're working with these energies, you're working with writing these invocations, so you get used to it. And once you're used to it, you will be able to write better and better and more elaborate rituals using symbols other than the circle cross. I mean, say the Golden Dawn was based on the Tree of Life symbol. But there are other symbols you could use as well. And there are other landscapes which you can work to develop more elaborate rituals. Basically, I did the circle cross ritual for a period of about 6 or 7 years. And eventually it got boring and it drove me nuts. But when I think about it, it's what made me into the ritual magician I am now, because of all the experiences I had doing those rituals, all the work I did balancing them and feeling those energies, that made it significant. So what I'm suggesting here is, rather than just sit and copy rituals from a book, but actually to create something unique for you and something unique for your personality in the future. Anyway, good luck.